In 1996, Sega developed and released NiGHTS into Dreams for the Sega Saturn. The origin and concept of the character NiGHTS began with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 released in 1992 for the Sega Genesis. Head officials from Sega later commented that the staff desired to create a different type of game and to showcase the gaming strength of the Saturn. The game of NiGHTS is that every night all human dreams are depicted in NiGHTopia and Nightmare, two different yet similar parts of the dream world. In NiGHTopia, specific aspects of the dreamer's personalities are represented by spheres called Idea. The evil ruler of the nightmare realm, Wiseman the Wicked, is stealing this dream energy from sleeping humans to gain enough strength to conquer NiGHTopia and eventually the real world. As a part of his plans, Wiseman creates 5 magical beings called the Nightmarian, jester appearance beings that can fly. Low-level Nightmarian are creatures by the names of Night and Riala. However, NiGHTS rebels against Wiseman's plans and is punished by being imprisoned inside an Idea palace. One day, Elliot Edwards and Claire Sinclair, 2 separate teenagers from the city of Twin Seeds, go through a series of failures in their lives and experience a large amount of stress. Elliot's a basketball player who happens to be playing a game with his friends, but they're challenged by a group of older students and is later humiliated after losing the game. Claire is an experienced singer and desires to be a professional performer, auditioning for a performance in the city of Twin Seeds. She suffers stage fright during the audition and doesn't perform well and doesn't think that she'll get the role. Later that night, the pair have nightmares based on the stressful incidents they had experienced during the day and escape into NiGHTopia and discover NiGHTS being imprisoned, later releasing him as NiGHTS tells them about their dreams and Wiseman's plans. The 3 decide to work together to stop Wiseman and restore peace to NiGHTopia. Through events in the game, they succeed and both Wiseman and Riala are stopped. The next day, back in Twin Seeds, Elliot is seen walking through a parade until he has a vision of NiGHTS looking at him through a billboard. This helps him to remember that Clarice is having her performance, and he later goes to see her as she's singing brilliantly. The both of them glance at one another, and the next scene shows the pair back in a spring valley in NiGHTopia, which leaves the entire experience vague as to what they have done is either real or everything they experienced just a dream. Reactions to the game were that both critics and gamers had critical and crucial acclaim and praise for the game. Sega officials desired to make a strong new franchise besides Sonic, and the idea was at the time that NiGHTS was the game to build stability for the Saturn, and it seemed likely at the time as well. The attention to detail for NiGHTS and of him had widespread praise, but critics and gamers also complained that the game was too short, not having as much levels or game time as compared with Super Mario 64, also released in 1996. But even with the comparison with Mario 64, NiGHTS was seen as a character who could have been a strong force for Sega. For many years, throughout the troubled lifespan of the Saturn console, there were proposals for a sequel to NiGHTS, but numerous problems kept the plans of a sequel from being implemented. Plans for a Dreamcast sequel were proposed in 1999, partially started in 2000 for the Dreamcast, but cancelled. Eventually, in 2007, a period of 11 years after the original NiGHTS game was released for the Sega Saturn, the character of NiGHTS would return for the Nintendo Wii in NiGHTS Journey into Dreams. Gamers and critics were actually neutral when the game was first released due to the iconic status that the first game had attained, some even mentioning at that particular time that a sequel should not be made, that the original NiGHTS game was almost a masterpiece of mid-1990s video gaming and that it should never be expanded upon. However, when the game was released, reactions to it were mixed. Some praised the return of NiGHTS, but others thought the aspects of the game appealed too much for nostalgia and details within the game were flawed. The criticism of the sequel and the fact that there was no real character development for NiGHTS in more than 10 years caused Sega officials to put a third game's plans on hiatus. In 2010, Sega officials expressed interest in making a third NiGHTS game, if there were enough claims, or interest, or even a demand for it, but nothing came of it. In 2019, Sega actually filed a trademark for NiGHTS Dream Wheel. Critics mentioned that if a third game were to be made, and eventually when it is, it would be more than a decade from when the sequel was made. And the fact that gamers might not be so willing to embrace a NiGHTS game based on such a long period of time between games, and a lack of direction for the franchise. Sometimes a character can be forgotten, but only because the character did not have any interest from others.